I'd like you to join me Monday nights, 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for Open Canvas. Don't forget to bring an open mind.
Yes, folks, that's right. Bring an open mind to an open canvas. Again, that is Monday nights, 10 p.m. Eastern. UFOs to government corruption. This is Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com. You don't need to expect us. We're already here.
We did not engage in conflict that was out of line with our mission.
Is it disloyal? Is it sedition? Is it treason to oppose the hands of tyranny? Never!
I will never send troops anywhere on a mission of that kind without telling them that if somebody shoots at them, they can darn well shoot back.
I know not what course others may take, but as for me, give me liberty! Oh, give me death!
A dark cloud is finally lifting across the world as U.S. military intelligence and their global partners are destroying the deep state criminal power structure that has ruled over our planet for hundreds of years.
We are free with the God-given right, and we shall not yield that right to any power on earth.
Hi, I'm Scott McKay. The world is at, and I am your host on The Tipping Point on Revolution Radio, where every Monday from 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern, we bring you the latest in this ensuing takedown of this global criminal empire.
That's an image of strength.
You'll get the raw, hard truth here on The Tipping Point. So come join us Mondays, 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern in Studio B at revolution.radio.
This is the people's war. It is our war. We are the fighters. Fight it then. Fight it with all that is in us. And may God defend the right.
Warning! Warning!
We've got to stop them! They're going to kill us all! See how the trouble you've started? Be they the government, be they industry, be they organized labor, be they anyone, or human beings. Time when the operation of the machine becomes so odious, makes you so sick at heart that you can't take part. You can't even passively take part. And you've got to put your bodies upon the gears and upon the wheels, upon the levers, upon all the apparatus, and you've got to make it stop. And you've got to indicate to the people who run it, to the people who own it, that unless you're free, the machine will be prevented from working at all.
Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com, the #1 listener-supported talk radio station, throwing ourselves upon the gears of the machine. Revolution Radio, where information never sleeps.
You called down the thunder, well now you got it.
Right! You tell them I'm coming! And hell's coming with me, you hear? Hell's coming with me!
Revolution Radio.
Mini Ice Age Conversations podcast. It's about observing cycles, sharing insights, and solving problems together by combining historical, climate, food, and economic data so you can make informed decisions as we shift into a new era. Here's what was, this is what's coming. Our world is never going back to 2019, so what will the new era look like? And most importantly, what is immediate that will affect the pocketbook and the outlook into next year so we can all get ready? Thank you for joining. I'm your host, David DuByne. And I do thank you for joining us tonight, wherever you reside on this beautiful blue planet. Streaming through the solar system. Did you know they hit a comet, an asteroid, and caused a tail? Electric interaction, electric universe for sure. Birkeland currents. We can harvest that plasmic electricity right here on Earth. Etheric energies, but nope, we have to move over to scrappy wind. Ransom, I'm glad you're joining me tonight. Excuse me, so many changes happening on the planet right now. It's kind of an overload. You know, it's been like that at times where as soon as you get to where you can process the information, suddenly, you know, that slowdown, just like it is now, it's coming from summer when everything was growing super fast, really difficult to keep up with the fields, let them go to flower. But now it's starting to be able to cut those fields. There's a time where it steps down where you can catch up on things, on tasks, you know, especially around if you're doing something with some land. Now's the time where things are stepping down, planting into the fall gardens. But see, your mind can wrap around it because you're slowing down on the tasks. But you get that with the news cycle too, where it'll slow down enough where you can just start to catch up on everything and make a wider picture. And then wham, like this. Things are going exponentially up and up and up, and it's happening so fast by the time you really just even turn around. And days ago, you're into a different world again. It's almost like dimensions are shifting like every few days, where people are noticing that this veil is starting to part, and in a quick way. I don't know. Strange and unusual. Ransom, thanks for joining. We had a few problems tonight trying to get the stream up. But if you are listening out there, we're also on Mountain High Time, Ransom Godwin's YouTube page, the Mini Ice Age Conversations podcast page, both on YouTube, and also Rumble. Head over to the Adapt 2030 channel, all streamed right here from the Seed Point, freedomslips.com, Revolution Radio. Ransom, does it seem like time is speeding up and we're starting to see through the illusion, or is it just me out on a farm looking at changing coloring leaves in the fall time, putting pumpkins on the front porch? What do you think?
We're speeding up. Plus, we're going into this, kind of winter where we get to pan out the things of the growing season here. And it's not looking good. I mean, I was trying to have a thought experiment earlier when I was scamming through the news, and I was thinking, which countries are doing good? Because I can't find that information. All I see are problems that every nation, first world or third world, are having right now, with their food supply, with their governments acting bizarrely. I mean, you could kind of count in almost everybody with that. And all of this wealth that's being transferred right before everyone's eyes, while there's 20 or 30 different distraction programs going simultaneously to make people really not pay attention to everything kind of going down the tubes. I mean, I hate to say I told you so, but I did mention it. Things are getting bad all over. I mean, I've seen articles even talking about with, voters being hungry. Will they make it to the polls? I mean, what a headline.
17th century Maunder minimum type conditions, and the same news headlines would have been on the cotton papered ink printing press of the 1600s, the same exact right now. You can't get to the polls, you're too hungry. Unbelievable. 400-year cycle.
Right. And I'm even looking at all tourist destinations, and they all have the same headlines, which is, maybe you don't want to go there right now because, everybody's robbing people. They're stealing gas. They're chopping people up. They're kidnapping people. And that's just on the low, street level.
Well, what country is that? That sounds like an exciting tourist destination.
Well, pick your spot in Europe. I mean, if you want to go, how about the Eiffel Tower? You could just go hang out by the Eiffel Tower. You could go to the UK. You could go to Mexico and several of their tourist destinations. And, it's just not the same world we were living. And I was going through some of your older videos, and you kept saying this phrase, we're never going to go back to a pre-2019 world. That ship has sailed. That was the beginning of the reset, and now we're in full swing. And I'm just, you got these people joking around at the top of the pyramid about how they're going to chip us and vaccinate us and limit our freedom. And it's all a big joke to these people. They have their own idea of what the future is going to have, and it just really doesn't involve the common man. And I hate to say that. So it's nothing for these type of people, megalomaniacs, I guess you could call them. And you can go all the way back in history where you had, royal families that would just get bored one day basically and say, hey, you know what? Let's send 2,000, 3,000 soldiers over there to fight with my cousin. I'm sure he's bored too. It seems like that's what we're doing now. It's really crazy. And I see the strife on people's persona as they're walking around. And I've always lived in a very low income area in the borderlands here. But when I'm seeing desperation everywhere, there's I've been kind of keeping track of this for the last 3 or 4 years. Giant increase in homeless people, a giant increase in people that seemingly could be doing something, but they have given up because they have a little niche now where they can get their drink and they can get their smoke and they can get their, their food ration, and they don't really have to worry about life anymore. I mean, I guess.
Oh, yeah, you're right. Damn it.
I'm trying a lot easier.
No.
Trying. It's just it's bizarre, and I'm seeing a lot of them, and I'm not talking bad about people that are genuinely down on their luck and had a string of bad events, but I'm seeing people that they don't care anymore. This is like hordes of zombies showing up, and a lot of these people, and this is ironic because living in a small town, you get to see people throughout their life over and over again, and the different stages of their life. Now, while I've kind of turned into a hermit, and I used to be a real people person, and now I'm not because everyone's attached to some kind of drama, whether it's pharmaceutical related, but mental health issues are so far skyrocketed right now. It's really interesting because I think that's all about to be turned off as part of the reset switch, so that millions and millions of people literally are losing their minds. And then you got all of these scare programs. I'm sure you saw that NATO and Russia thought it was a bright idea with all of the tensions around the world and the fear level of citizens around the world, that they thought, you know what, how about both of us just have nuclear war drills right next to each other? And you know how drills traditionally sometimes go live when they're, and they're just pushing this down everybody's throat. And then back here in the U.S., I'm sure something similar is probably happening in China and Russia. It's been happening for some time. The world government, it seems to me, is sewing up its dissidents and cataloging them and destroying them one by one. It seems like they have a program that's able to go after each person for what they say, what they think. It's a social credit score system, but it's more than that. It's literally the truth ministry of the world, shutting down people individually and not just telling them to be quiet and be invisible, but turning off their money, turning off their entire lifestyle in a grand scheme. And that's spreading everywhere. So I think we're finally seeing the last death throes of free nations worldwide. And we're coming into the communist run system. And I actually saw an article where U.S. officials were talking about the only way forward for a one world government is if China takes the reins. So we have people in our own government that are
sick.
giving up and I only see two scenarios possible with the whole U.S.-China relationship. A, we're setting them up and building them up to tear them down, or B, and I think it's more likely, judging by the evidence, is that we've already pretty much had a bunch of people sell out for monetary value, even though that same monetary value will be worth less later. But it's enough of it that they can take the hit when the reset happens and come out the other end with all their hidden digital currencies and their Cayman Island accounts and, yada, yada, yada. The rich will stay rich and the poor will become even poorer. And the design is just like that of the Communist Party in China, where they do allow some semblance of capitalism, but they get to pick the winners and losers. And that's been a big topic here in the U.S. Should the government have the right to pick winners and losers? Well, they've been doing it for a long, long time. And it seems that we're going to go completely over that down to the individual, where the party gets to pick which individuals are allowed to go forward with capitalism and make money. So that's not a very pretty outcome, especially when you account in that there's a giant attack on the food supply for normal, everyday citizens of the world right now.
Yeah. It's like a hazy rocket launch. It's like having a Tesla that drags behind a Honda generator so it can power itself. It's 15 or 18x increasing electricity prices. Oil banks are gone. Metals shut down. Shipping rates plunging 75%. And actually the demand is matching that. So what happened to the 75% of world trade that just collapsed, completely collapsed? Gasoline shortages across France. energy crisis across Europe. And we're all supposed to believe that this is just randomly happening as these people have written the books, the self-professed elite, that their perception of themselves is elite. It can't be going down as quickly as it is without every single thing in fashion being run by an AI as to what plugs need to be slowly pulled to collapse the system, but extract as much wealth in the process. It's not like a Jenga game where everything will fall apart so quickly. If Jenga was lava, would be more a good synopsis of what this would be. You pull a little bit over here, that fills in, it slides in. Oh, it went to a different direction until you cool it down at the bottom, and then you've extracted it and flattened that thing completely out into just a lava pancake as it was coming down. By the time it's cooled, you would have not known there was a mound of lava right there. It's going to be like that play. And you remember you said megalomaniac when you were talking a bit earlier. So I don't know. I went to thesaurus.com to see what megalomaniac synonyms are, like words that are the same meaning but different. So narcissist, self-worshipping, selfish, self-important, egomaniac, overconfident egomaniac. These are the kind of words that define megalomania. But the speed at which this is being rolled out, and on purpose, you can see everything just disconnecting by the second. Food is for sure next. I was doing an article tonight on this right here. This is before the video is even released. This is a little pre-release data here. There is a company in the Netherlands called HAK. They're stopping production of their vegetable line that then goes into jars, and beans and processed bean products. They're going to stop all production for 6 weeks from January, but they've already shut down almost. They cite the energy prices being so high, and they don't even know, and here's the kicker, they don't even know what it would be like in January, February, so to be on the safe side, they closed. Now, this is a factory that's producing food. Metals, smelters, anything steel, copper, zinc, aluminum has all shut down across Europe. You're telling me that a major food producer needs to stop, and they don't draw nearly as much electricity in their operations as, say, copper smelting or steel manufacturing, steel refining, blending different alloys. That takes a huge amount of heat energy. But to run a factory with those robot arms that, twist a lid on top of something after it's full, comes out of the vat, that is very low electricity usage compared to what a steel or copper refiner, zinc smelters are doing. We're at the point now where the food producers are shutting down because they don't have the electricity. Before, okay, it was metals. Before, okay, it was electric companies. What happens when these continue to shut down? And this is the whole thing. It seems so scripted and so easily. You could see the reset was here, and these are all the excuses for the lost food that's not going to be produced because of these cycles that we're into again. And here we sit at the precipice of European manufacturing of foodstuffs shutting down, meaning whatever was made in a factory won't be on a shelf because the factory shut down. And how long will it take them to bring it back up? Not sure. Not really sure. But when you're looking at this state where we are now, it started way back with, there was a couple sniffles and a cough. Now to where do we sit? Complete collapse of everything that what is economy. It just hasn't hit the United States yet, but it's happening everywhere else around the world right now. in certain ways, forms, fashions, levels, and intensities. So, Ransom, where do you think it brings us from here? I mean, coming into a lean harvest season. So all those projections, even just last month from the USDA of downgrading, oh, it's going to be better. They're going to have to downgrade another 10%. And then they were caught lying about how much is actually stored in the grain silos, because all that grain stacking up on the Mississippi because of low water. Well, they had to go find places to put it. So the USDA would say, oh, well, we have 1,000 tons in this warehouse. And they're like, it's full. You can't go in there because it's already full, so you can't stock anything there. Well, a fair amount went into these warehouses and said, maybe we can find room for a little bit because it is an emergency. We need to store it so it doesn't get rained on, doesn't get out in the elements, because as soon as it gets rained on, you can't sell it. It's not going to be approved. Not going to be fit for, distribution. So trying to find anywhere, man, that little cubby hole in your grandma's dresser that used to hold just the needles and buttons for sewing your clothing, that little drawer will take it. That's how much they need to store grain. So they're looking every nook and cranny. And once they went into these warehouses that were supposedly full of 1,000 tons, they go in and it's either zero or it's half of what it was. And they're like, wait a second. Now they're going to have to redo the entire carryover stocks from last year, and see when these numbers hit, it's really gonna they're gonna realize the food's way lower in the stores than they think they have on a global basis, country by country. Because if the US is inflating those numbers, and we're seeing every country in the world going into these same food problems now, where all the food's rising, doubling, and tripling, then every country is following the same MO. Because if they're all doing this in unison, they're all going to do the same exact thing to disguise the crop losses and the lack of storage of crops, all in unison too. So now this is the year. This is it. They're really going to find out how much is in the stores, and then are the storage facilities, grain storage facilities, grain warehouses, how much tonnage there is, because this year is a disastrous yield in America. So where do you think it leaves us, Ransom? Like, are we play it out from here? Oh, wait, here comes the C-130 over the house. See if you can hear it. Double props on that one. Did you hear it? It flies through here most times on Thursday nights through the route, through the valley, below the radar. So our property goes up to like 1,400 feet, but these guys are flying down below the mountaintop, so a few hundred feet off the valley here. Crazy times. Anyway, Ransom, back to you.
If you would have talked to me earlier today, like if we would have had this show in the daytime, I don't know if I could have did it, because Holloman has upticked its military activity, but I would say about 15-fold. Usually we'd hear 2 or 3 sonic booms during the week when they're practicing sorties or whatever. It's a daily thing now, 5 or 6 times a day. And I could tell that they're going out to the bombing range because of the location of some of the booms are pretty far north to us, and they hit our house in a certain way versus the ones that they're doing near the Air Force Base. So I could tell that both Army is doing a lot of stuff, and then the Air Force here is practicing all kinds of stuff. So just a firsthand experience. I know that military activity is skyrocketing right now. We could always tell this. I've lived here through multiple incidents that we would call, like all the way from Gulf War all the way up. And this is something that always happens directly before an invasion by the United States. So to me, I'm sitting here just waiting for where are we going? And then I'm looking at U.S. news. And of course, I think where we are right now is equivalent to a dumpster fire as far as the nation. And I'm not talking bad about America. A lot of people say, hey, well, you're bad mouthing America. And I'm like, no, I love America. I'm just, it's kind of hard to look at things and not notice what's going on. I'm not one of those people that would sit in a burning house and deny it until, it's where I'm sitting is on fire. Just look at the headlines as far as, a lot of people say that we only talk about fear porn, but it's hard not to when you're looking at stuff like this. Core U.S. inflation rises to 40-year high. Security big high, right? That's a 40-year high. So that's on top of other stuff going on. 15.6% of food increase since Biden took office, whether you blame him or not. And,
is that Shadow Stats numbers? Because they have it up around 28% on Shadow Stats.
I imagine that these are low estimates of what's going on because they're trying to incrementally roll out the fact that
it's 28%.
Yeah. And then, like Zero Hedge is putting out little, I don't know, it's like a message to certain people that have money, right? So they have a headline, countries with no property tax where foreigners can own real estate. Like, if that's not a secret message to tell people with money, you might want to go find a backup plan somewhere. I don't know what is. And then,
what are those countries anyway? What are the countries in that article?
Let's look over here. I looked at them earlier.
That's interesting. Everybody take notes because I am.
Right. So they're talking, as far as the U.S. goes, Alaska is really the only one that offers areas with no property taxes. The Turks and Caicos place, let's see here, the Cayman Islands.
Those are islands down in the Caribbean, Turks and Caicos.
Yeah. And then you got Dominica, Malta, Monaco, the Republic of Georgia. Yes, I totally.
Oh, yeah, I've been wanting to go there too.
I want to be right there at ground zero. I'm already at ground zero in the U.S., but
Yeah, at least they have good wine and 8,000 years of history, right?
True. So you can look at the sites before your utter demise. No, I'm just kidding.
I'll toast to that. There we go.
United Arab Emirates, Dubai, Fiji, Sri Lanka. And what I'm seeing by this list is they're either places you don't want to go or you can't afford to go. I mean, it's like on that list was the best and the worst of it's like the tale of two cities there, the best and the worst of times. And this is very interesting to me. This is another one from Zero Hedge. They're knocking them out because if you guys haven't noticed, most of the media companies are fluffing stuff to go only in a certain way. You're only allowed to care about Ukraine. You're only allowed to, care about the impending warming doom if we keep driving our regular cars. And every time a electric car goes by, I just hear this weird sound that's like loser. But I'm kidding. But anyway, here's an article that's talking about.
I'll have some of that.
oil tycoons are allegedly about had it with the situation going on. And this is a quote from Jamie Dimon. This is a effing war. He slams Biden for begging to the Saudis to give us more oil. We have plenty of oil. We know that we have hundreds of years of oil. There's no reason for us to be paying high gas prices. And it brings me back full circle. What countries are doing well right now? Like, tell me a country that you've been seeing in the news articles that's just like booming. It has peace. They have no social issues. And then you look at the United States, what do you think's coming for the next year if grain and beans and all of these other things are sitting there rotting on the Mississippi River while they browbeat the public that it's their fault because the water levels aren't normal. And that's why they can't, they have all these excuses that have nothing to do with reality. The reality is people are stifling the supply chain on purpose. People are trying to find the best ways to get out of the reset with more money. And they don't really care what happens at that level, at the CEO level and above, or the puppets of the nations. They're just getting a big fat check. And as long as that check comes and they continue to live their lifestyle, they don't care about the lower class. And it's funny that they act. And you sent me this tweet. I'm sorry, not twit, from the Wall Street Silver of all these people fighting over gasoline in France. So there's another great tourist destination you could go. And in the backdrop, we have less babies being born, and the ones that are being born are delayed. And I'm not going to say why, but the evidence is overwhelming that the kids that were born in the last several years are having fundamental learning disorders for one reason or another. You can kind of debate that on your own since we're on YouTube. And it just goes on and on. We have a audio recording now that's going to set the nation on fire if you're paying attention to the election soap operas. They have a tape from Steve Bannon that basically says that Trump, he's gonna say the election's stolen no matter what, which is not a surprise to me because that's what all politicians usually do. You could look at the track history of
go back to the Greek era. Phoenicians, dude. No, I'm going to go back.
You really can't, and it's been like that for some time. So it's up to you to decide. Well, this is a grainy footage, and I might point out that some of the best war footage that came out of the Ukraine in the last 2 years actually came from a video game. It wasn't real, but millions and millions and millions of people shared it. They discussed it. They argued about it. Who's right, who's wrong, and it was all based on fake reality, just like the metaverse. So that they're pushing that really hard. And if the audience is looking, here's a graph of this concept, because you're not allowed to say population replacement. I'll put it that way so it doesn't trigger the algorithm.
Migration. Just use the word migration, population migration.
Well, here's a chart from El Paso. This is the biggest city I live in, or that's near me. It's not far away. And it's saying that this is just the people that are coming through and going through the Border Patrol and making contact with them. And that's 12,000 people a year just in the one little port at the one city. And that's just people that are coming at that one port that are talking. That doesn't count the other 5 ports of entry in the city. And that doesn't count the entire state of Texas or the other states. So millions of people are coming north while the investments are going south. And it's hard not to see this. So here's the article I was looking for from MSN. U.S. sees China as the only other nation capable of reshaping global order. And when you get into there, they're giving China more props than the United States on the ability to run the liberal world order, or the new world order, or the one world order, whatever. Take your pick, whatever you want to call it. It's here. We're living in it, and they don't care what you want or what you want to vote. If you can't tell, ask the people from Hong Kong. They had a vote, they had a say, but where are they now? Where are any stories about them now? Not a single one. And that should tell you who has big sway over all of the media companies, because I was following a lot of people in Hong Kong at the time. Some pretty patriotic people from Hong Kong, very liberty-minded, freedom-minded. They had streams, they had feeds, they had pictures. They started fighting, or protesting, which basically ended up being fighting. And then the next thing you see are Chinese police shooting them in the street. And then they opened that bridge up. Troops went in, and now I haven't heard anything from any of those people, which makes me, ask myself, is not World War II happening? It's just reshaped in a technological manner right now, where there's everything from, possible nuclear bombs to re-education camps to God knows what else is behind closed doors in any number of authoritarian countries right now, including the United States. Because let's not forget, several years back during the Obama administration, it came to light that there were several off-book black sites that the CIA were using to torture and question people right here in the United States, right in Chicago, Detroit, and some other cities, I'm sure.
Wow. That's a brainful to take in there. Like, all those things you just described are all occurring at the exact same time. So wrap that in your head there, that all of that is going on is happening simultaneously. In addition to all these other things with the electricity and economy happening across wider Europe and the UK. And I got something for you, though. Now you're going to need to add this on top of that. This is on the chat board here on freedomslips.com. At Yuri, infrastructure across all the Ukraine, from Lvov to Sumy to Kharkov, hit again. Massive strikes everywhere again in the afternoon here. And also Belgorod and Kursk. there's not going to be any grains coming out of here any longer. Now, see that? Let me string this tale for you together, if I may. You heard about that last ship of 15,000 tons of grain that got out just before, like 2 salvos of missile strikes before. And it was a UN flagship, and it was a World Food Program ship that had 15,000 tons of grain on it. That was something that had been stored that wasn't even approved for animal feed in the country, got sent out to send down to Ethiopia. Now, keep that in mind. That was substandard grain that didn't even pass inspection to go into the EU for their animal feed, but they thought it was still good enough for human consumption / animal feed for Ethiopia, so they sent the vessel. Hey, it's on us. We're the UN. That stopped. So they still have 9 million plus tons of grain. The last time I saw it was like 9.5 million tons of stored grains, mainly corn, in the Ukraine right now, awaiting export out. And then soon following this will then be the wheat. Where will it go to? Because Ransom, you sent me those pictures of the beans stacked up on the Mississippi. So then I look at this and I go, grains are going to start stacking up in all the warehouses and all over the place in the Ukraine as the new harvest comes in, because they haven't even gotten the old harvest out of that supply chain yet onto barges. So the barges that were probably loaded from before are still sitting there full. They didn't go anywhere. Ships too. So all that infrastructure that was there to store the grains is completely full of stuff they never could export from last year. Now, supposedly, capital S here, they were able to plant on time and plant everything. But perhaps, like you say, those same news media persons, maybe that wasn't exactly the best assessment for agricultural planting acreage or hectares across the Ukraine. Maybe that forecast was incorrect by orders of magnitude. Now this can all be explained away. So if it's a much, much smaller crop, well, you don't have to store as much. That's on the positive side. But what does that signal also? Yeah, the rest of the population go, whoa, we didn't even grow 50% of what we normally do. That's a big problem. But look at it from the other eyes. Oh, you only have to store half as much. Now, they can't get that grain out of there. And now since more ports are being taken off, it's absolutely stuck there. So this is a negative minus, because a lot of people were counting on that grain getting out of there, even if it was at a trickle, like those 10,000 ton vessels or the 15,000 ton vessels that are really, really small. Really small. And you think about 10,000 tons and you're like, wow, that's an unimaginable amount of something. But some of these breakbark super tankers going over across the ocean can take 1 million tons. Like the scale of it too. I mean, these vessels cruising across. And how do you bring 2 million barrels of oil across the ocean? And you're looking at these giant volumes comparatively to what a 10,000 ton would be, going from the Black Sea, skirting through the Red Sea and down into Ethiopia. That's what they did in the 1940s. How do you think steamers were cruising around the islands of the Pacific? You know, think of some famous tales from the 1930s and 40s about the Pacific Islands and those hopping between them. It's the same. So how many things can be stacking up? Because let me ask you, Ransom, because you gave me that one on here. So the stack up so far, the pipelines got blown up. So they're sending a huge amount of LNG over to Europe. But again, they're totally full on shore because most of it wasn't LNG that was supplying. It was those pipes that were coming from Russia in different parts. It was mainly by pipeline that LNG was offloaded, but it's got a storage tank itself that's only so large. And by the time they get that through the system, which was never the main thing, it was always like a third, the tertiary, that third backup plus to add in. A lot of that was for industry only. Like they got that LNG directly along all those ports there because when they finish their goods, like smelting, etc., they could just put it on ships and take it away right in the same place there. And it's out of town. And if it's all in the same area around the ports, all that's delivered there. And they even had their own electrical plants there at the ports that were running on that gas. Directly in there on a ship, almost pumped straight off the ship with a special hose right into their generators there. Now that needs to be rerouted all through to get to the regular pipeline system to make it out into Europe. But it's so slow because the pressures need to be built up. Every time they turn on a valve or something, they need to make sure that's not going to overpressurize and blow off whatever it is, a flange, a valve, a piece of pipe, something broken because the pressure went too high. So to like eke every, handle open and just wait and wait and wait. Is it going to do pressure? Okay, next one. It's not like you just turn the entire thing on because it could be way overpressurized. But then when it's so far, then it doesn't have enough pressure. So, they got these two sets of variables going down the same pipes because once it gets far enough away from that port and it's not at the pressure anymore that it was when you dangerously turn everything on from the pressures, the further you get away from that, then they get to this low pressure zone where there's not enough pressure for any kind of pumping to push it all the way through. So they're stuck, a rock in a hard place. So long story short is the LNG that has been sent from the United States is sitting offshore in those vessels running $370,000 a day to keep that LNG ships just offshore as a storage facility itself. So they're spending $375,000 a day just as a store right on the ocean there. That's crazy. So that's the second. And then the shipping dropping 75% across the planet means all these shipping containers are going to start to stack up everywhere again. That's a good thing to look for, stacking shipping containers. But then again, it's a stacked up thing. It's an oversupply. Now, where do you put all these shipping containers? Remember, we have the same exact problem go on. Was it probably like 2020? A huge amount of business just ceased on the planet. Remember that it just stopped on a dime? Hard to remember back to 2020. It seems like about 50 years ago, not 2. But everything stopped on a dime. And then the same oversupplies of things happened. Then there was a stoppage of sales and there was stopping of manufacturing. And then all of a sudden, these containers just started to pile up everywhere in ports, like seriously, up to the Himalaya for containers across the world because none of it was moving. It was all coming to its final, the next destination. When it got there, it got unloaded and it didn't get reloaded to go back because there's no more commerce. So they just start stacking those empty ones across the port, which is an opportunity for anybody out there looking for a shipping container. Maybe they're going to be a little bit cheaper now because they're going to start stacking up again like they did 2 years ago, like massive. But this time they're probably not going to move for a lot longer. So if you can get a decent used shipping container, that's the way to go if you're going to have a farm out there to store tools and things. You can lock that thing pretty well. And then let's see, what else do we got here? And Ransom, that was ABCD. Now we got the grain stuck on the Mississippi River. So what are the chances of 4 of those huge giant commodities stacking up across the planet on all these countries that can't handle the inflow? Natural, which would be the Mississippi going super low, or man-made, where pipelines stop, they need to bring it in by ship, but there's not enough capacity to unload the ships. How is all this happening at the same time? How is that possible without this being a complete plan from start to finish? And that's where I'm going.
Well, I actually think it's going to get worse because I'm viewing this as all repeated history. So I'm sure you know that in World War II, before any real fighting started, a lot of things happened out on the ocean between supposedly commercial boats. Some of them, had Nazis on them. Some of them had American naval forces on it. And I see that same pattern going right now. So I would probably think that in the near future, not only are you going to see a double in the amount of pirate attacks on the oceans, but you're also going to see stuff where China and the U.S. have butted heads because both China and the United States is now utilizing what would be considered commercial boats for naval operations. So you know that they're all mingling and intersecting in the Pacific all over the place. And not only that, the same type of thing is going to start happening around Turkey and Greece and the Black Sea area because of things that are going on there. And you can just see that in 1 year, if the right things happen, and this is not even counting the Middle East and what might happen in Israel, because if you've been paying attention to that, violence is skyrocketing there between Muslims and Hebrew people. And there's some Bible prophecy all tied up into this. And I brought it up because I believe that the world elite, they have a plan, and that plan always gets told to you ahead of time. So not only can you study history, but you could take them for their word. And I'm going to go ahead and include a little prophecy from the Abrahamic religions about Jerusalem kind of sparking maybe not this war, but the last world war, in their opinion. Armageddon on Golgotha, that's a place in Israel. But it's all supposed to start over Solomon's temple, some kind of disagreement about who considers who an infidel, and then the Dome on the Rock would be destroyed. That's the only way that a new Solomon's temple could be built. And you can see that there are people moving to that. But let's get back to the ocean. And something I think you're going to see here in the next couple months or over the winter is some kind of ship destroyed that's carrying cargo through the Pacific, either by China or the United States, claiming that the other one is using that for military purposes. And here's an article right here from militarytimes.com talking about how China is using civilian ships to enhance their naval capabilities. This is a 2022 article. And here is the number of pirate attacks on ships worldwide in 2021, which doubled from the year, I think, before that. So just bulk carriers was 47 ships hit, product tankers, 20 of them hit, container ships, 30 hit, general cargo, 4. Now you got to ask yourself, which one of these are the ones with the military stuff involved when you start looking at these ships disappearing or getting pirated and what might be on them. And here's another article from this came from Captain, I think it's called, basically, but it's talking about a report by the U.S. Navy that says that China has militarized seafarers, and it goes into this exact concept that the war will be started on the high seas and the China Sea, probably around Taiwan or Japan, and that will escalate an entire regional Pacific war, if you want to call it that. But then you have to look at the backdrop, which is the other side. And all this has to do with is having war or military tensions in the avenues that we classically use for international commercial trade of goods. So all of that can be shut down overnight with just one incident. I don't know what that incident could be. Maybe, blowing up some random island out in the Pacific, or they might just go ahead and scare everybody and release a bomb that might not even be a nuclear bomb or anything like that, but just a giant bomb in the Ukraine area to just scare the wits out of everyone, close the markets, because I see that happening within the next couple of months. And with all of the hokey stuff that's been going on, bridges being blown up, IDs being found, pipelines being blown up, and countries in turmoil, like, you can't tell what Germany's about to do. Out of one end, they're kind of siding with the Russians, and on the other end, they're siding with NATO. And you know that conflict is going to have to be resolved within Germany. So there's another repeat of a split of opinion right down the German population. And if you look back at the last decade or 20 years, really, Berlin has become the financial capital for the EU. I mean, it's if that goes down, all of the other NATO countries and European nation countries will start to collapse one by one as soon as that main financial market collapses. And what it looks like is they're going to use the energy fight back and forth between the countries to spark that collapse in Europe. And then, I don't know where you're going to get your food and groceries from. And today I was outside picking what little stuff that I did grow. It's about to get cold probably in October here. And I don't know, I got a bucket of corn and, 5 or 6 melons and some squash, a couple of watermelons. But the fact is, if I was farming for my life this year, I'd be really in trouble. And then think about not even having the safety net of grocery stores and supply chain to help you. So if things get turned off, you are on your own, or at least you better be connected with the community of people that can, put their resources together so that some groups of people don't go hungry. And it's not like the first time we've done it. America has done it before. We've gone through hard times, and it was only the people in the cities that really bared the brunt of it, and extremely poor people that didn't have the land to farm. So if you have just a little bit of land, you might want to think about seriously, finally, just farming for fun, if not just for survival as a safety net, because these globalists are playing games right before our lives, and those games are military, economic, and starvation, pandemic. You go down the list. They're going out of their way to cause strife. What's the last time you heard a leader of any country of the world talk about, you know what, we all need to get along, and we need to figure something out. Things are getting out of control. We need to go back towards the idea of peace. None of them are saying it. All of them want war. The right, the left, in almost every country with their, the latest thing that they go along with. It shows you how oiled and, good the machine of propaganda works now compared to even just 20 years ago, where more people would question things, but they still get away with it. Look, we went into Iraq that did not invade us, that did not attack us. We just said that there was weapons of mass destruction there. And this is an ironic thing, because people are so short in memory that they allowed the government to lie to them about weapons of mass destruction that didn't exist, simultaneously ignoring the ones that did exist that the United States sold them. So that's the whole funny part of the Iraq war, is they said it had to do with 9/11. They said it had to do with weapons of mass destruction, but then they bald-faced lied to people about yellow cake uranium and failed to mention smallpox, mustard gas, and probably some other stuff that we sold Saddam Hussein when he was one of our assets. So, imagine the things that are going on now that everybody's going to learn about in 10 years that are unfolding now behind the propaganda. You could go back to 1991. They told the American people that Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait and they were dumping babies out of incubators on the ground. That all turned out to be just a fairy tale.
I remember the girl crying on Scream. They're taking the babies out of the incubators. And even back then, you're like, what? That's a little far-fetched. And then you started to think then the whole story was they were going to use that heating element out of there to keep something at a constant temperature so they could make another batch of deadliness. That's the way they were trying to portray it with that girl. And she was, you had to have been 20 or something, crying. Oh, they saw him taking the babies out, just throwing the babies on the floor so they could freeze. Yeah, they were really descriptive with the words. And the whole thing was to take the incubators and move it into production. Oh, the weapons of mass destruction that were in Iraq were gold-backed dinars. That was the weapon of mass destruction. Because we find ourselves right at the exact same place today, but the whole world's going to switch over to it. It was just they were jumping too early to try to get out of the central bank and back their currencies by gold and oil both, and accept payments in anything. And they were going to do their own currency with gold. 1933 in America. Everything was backed by gold. You walk in, you slap that note on the bank teller's desk and say, I would like the equivalent of gold, and they give it to you. As long as it's large enough piece. I guess with the good gold backs, if it was 1,000th of an ounce, you could, for $2, you could probably get one of those notes. That's what he had started before the U.S. invasion. And near the same time, might I add, Gaddafi in Libya had the world's largest waterworks project taking water from underneath Libya in the Nubian sandstone aquifer and pumping it up and creating lakes in the middle of the desert. But if you look at the topography of Libya before, off the Mediterranean, when it flows really, really far south, when it starts to get in what you consider the Sahel or the middle of the Saharan center there, down into Chad, that was a huge estuary when there was water there. It was what you consider with like cattails and storks walking around, you know, looking for things in the water, that kind of estuary, a delta. That's what that place was. So he was trying to recreate that by using the thousands of cubic kilometers of water underneath North Africa to irrigate. And he had 100,000 acres of sorghum under production in the desert. This is way back in the 1980s. Then what was the first thing that the U.S. blew up when they invaded? Supposedly. The story is murky of even what happened. The water pipelines were the first things blown up. And you got to ask yourself, why that? Why that? Because he was proving possibility of tapping the Nubian sandstone aquifer. And at that time, even way back then, there were slight changes in the rainfall patterns that were coming off the Atlantic Ocean. It's the West African monsoon that had slightly changed at that point, and they knew it. So, you know, like I am seeing now, all the record crop production in Northern Africa, all those countries, record production. Now you got the above ground rainfall that could add into what you could tap from beneath the ground. And I am absolutely saying if it were to be used like that, that would be the world's largest food growing area on the planet. Double the size of all of the United States and Canada combined, double that. And you could get a 2-season rotational crop. It's in the warmest, sunniest place on the planet. Now, if the rest of the planet's going offline because of volcanic eruptions or this grand solar minimum setting in, which I think they're connected, then 45 degrees north latitude and above, we are going to grow less and less and less food all the way down to almost zero. And the same thing with 45 south down to the Antarctic, less and less and less until it goes down to almost zero. So if it's 40 degrees north latitude versus 0% at 45 degrees north latitude or 8% or whatever it was prior or previously, then all those latitudes would be affected. So you're looking at a huge amount of food crop loss coming. You're going to balance it out. If you developed that area of the world's 13 million square kilometers of crop growing zone. We'll be back, second hour, Mini Ice Age Conversations. Ransom, Godwin, and David DuByne. See you right after the break.
Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com, and we'll be right back after this message.
What would it feel like to have your health and wellness in balance?
All disease is simply the improper replication of the DNA molecule. FCE, full chronic extract, when you grow the plant indoors with no contaminants, and then you get 120 cannabinoids, what that does for your telomeres and for your DNA is incredible. It is absolutely the best as far as being able to get your health back. You know, a good phrase would be is there's no such thing as disease, just the lack of a good immune system. So if you can enhance your immune system, this is definitely the best way to do so. It's definitely the best thing from an immune system standpoint. If you take the position of, I just want to enhance my immune system, 120 cannabinoids is done through what's called the entourage and full plant extract compared to others that are out there and no contaminants. That's what's huge. So there's been tens of millions of dollars put into this and many people have had benefits from it type stuff. So this is about full spectrum and being able to get the entire benefit from the plant. This is the first time ever a patented process to actually do that. You know, if you take iron supplements, there's 4 different types of iron, and then the challenge is you have to have stuff that goes with it so the body will absorb it.
So this is a lot like when you take vitamin D so you can absorb the other vitamins. You kind of need the full spectrum of vitamins to get the benefit of each individual one.
Absolutely. And the thing that people notice the most is sleep. They have really, really deep sleep, and they sleep extremely well. And if they stop taking the product, then immediately their sleep is disrupted again. This is something that the Chinese and Egyptians and so on and so forth. So the research is more than just recent. It's extensive. So full plant extract, it's done indoors, aeroponics. Once you've got that, then you can get the full spectrum. People find that it resets their metabolism. So there'll be a lot of things that they're eating now, including sugar. It'll make it so that you will not desire to be able to consume the things that you're having challenges with. So wheat, dairy, sugar, all these different things. It'll balance your system so that it'll get you to the point where your metabolism is correct, and your palate, what you desire to eat, will change drastically.
The entourage effect is a proposed mechanism by which all the cannabis compounds interact exponentially in a synergistic manner to modulate the overall effects of the plant. The benefit of the entourage effect is the increase of the therapeutic experience. More compounds consumed in whole plant medicine typically means a higher likelihood of pain relief, anti-inflammatory action, anxiety relief, just to name a few. The endocannabinoid system, ECS, which is now being recognized as arguably the most important system in the human body, since it provides some degree of master control over all the other systems. In short, the ECS helps to balance many of our physiological systems and supports the body. The fact is, the ECS impacts just about everything, including appetite, immune response, calorie burn, pain and inflammation, and even cellular health. Its most important overall function is homeostasis, which basically means that it helps to keep the body in a healthy balance.
The changes coming up in the food pricing and the inavailability of medicines because China has shut off the spigot for base chemical materials to produce our antibiotics. A lot of things are going to shift, and having something that's produced in the United States that seems it covers 2 different arenas, something that's going to happen with your body because your food choices are going to change, and at the same time, if you're unable to get whatever medicines there are out there, there could be a substitute on a supplement or something more natural side versus the chemical side. Thursday nights, 10 p.m. to midnight Eastern Standard Time, freedomslips.com. The seed point for our live broadcast tonight right over Mountain High Time on YouTube. The Mini Ice Age Conversations podcast, YouTube channel, and a Rumble. Adapt 2030. Some of our tech broke down tonight. We weren't able to get to a few of the other platforms, but thank you for joining us. Now, the absurdity of what I'm about to read you, I thank Revolution Radio for allowing me to say it, because a lot of platforms, this might be, well, it's a news release, but it's so factual and crazy that it's almost in the bizarre where they might say you're making fun of something. I don't know. Consider a donation, freedomslips.com, Revolution Radio. If you like this type of information to flow uncensored, well, school forced to install a litter box for a student who identifies as a cat. Now, this is the insanity of the world we have gone to. Now, let me read that headline for you again, because perhaps you were thinking something about atmospheric electricity harvesting to generate power for our world. or using gold bullion jewelry as a medium of exchange, payment, transfer of wealth across borders with no tax. It's jewelry. Perhaps you were looking for something like that as the intro opener. But a school is forced to I got to start that over. Excuse me. Rewind. A school forced to install a litter box for a student who identifies as a cat. Like, what kind of world are we living in where you actually put a litter box for a human in a school and say that's normal? And what if they're going to use the bathroom in that thing? Like, I want to you put a webcam on it. Is that too sick to say? I mean, really? So what is this person going to go to the bathroom in front of everybody in the public, and that's their fetish, is they're getting in front of people? So they need to identify as a cat. That is maybe the world's ultimate troll right there. Oh, the insanity of the planet. Now we need to add in food shortages on top of the cat. Like, then where does that leave us? Where does that leave our world? Because before the break, we were talking about the gold-backed dinar and the invasion of Iraq because wanting to change to a gold-backed currency. And Gaddafi's doing the same thing, wanting to change to a gold-backed currency, but had put out these huge, gigantic, unbelievable waterworks projects across Libya, creating lakes in the middle of the desert, and then trying to resculpt it to the deltas that were further south in Libya down as you get into the border of Chad, because that's a huge, giant lake there. If you look at the mega lakes maps of 6,000 years prior, they call it the mid-Holocene. So you're looking at about 6,000 years prior, kind of right after we come out of the Younger Dryas, plus 6,000 years, or minus 6,000 years from where we sit today. Like right in that middle there, where we don't know much about the history, and they tell us it took 12,000 years for it to go to wet to dry, and they say it was a big lake back then 6,000 years ago. So you're supposed to play the timeline that 6,000 years ago there was a huge, giant mega lake as big as a Great Lake in America right there. And then slowly over the centuries, as weather patterns changed, that it turned into the super bone-dry desert that you see today. Well, if you go back to the maps of the 1500s and 1600s, there are so many maps of northern Africa that show massive lakes, not the size of the mega lakes by any means. But as a mega lake would dry down into what we would consider gigantic lake, that had disappeared. But when you look, it's really been only 400 to 500 years since the transition of that, what would have been a remnant of a mega lake that was out there that in our consideration would be on the super giantest lake that you know that you can go boating on a holiday. That's super giant. Bridges over it, connecting to other rivers, all these kind of things. It flew, and that was 400 years, but I encourage you to take a look at the maps because, I mean, things can change more quickly than are probably told to us in the history books. Which, you know, how many times has this reset come and gone in history? Because the same things happen. The food is reduced because the magnetic field, something happens with this. Our sun steps down and the jet streams and cloud cells go out of their flows because the magnetic field's not as tight. Right now, we actually have the polar north magnetic north and magnetic south in their wandering phases, in addition to what would go on normally. With just the regular jet streams get loose and cloud cells move to different places, all in a cycle. Now, you know, Ransom was talking heavily about elite planners telling you or showing you what they're going to do, but then it always shows that it comes back in history again. So I'm just wondering how many times this cycle has run its course. Because when you come literally to the point where you're going to put a litter box for a student that thinks they're a cat in the school, we have literally lost society as we know it. This is no longer society. It's an insane asylum. Thanks for joining again in the insane asylum, Ransom.
Right. You were talking about that, and I'm just like, you know, these foreshadows of what they're going to do versus history it is so kind of nauseating because you brought up Iraq. That's a good example. Everything that we're kind of doing worldwide kind of seems like pre-imminent invasion. And I'm not going to say by who or what, but the same steps are being made. And I was wondering if you had got a chance to check out that Bill Gates reel I sent you. What it was inside of there was Bill Gates basically talking about crop zones moving in the near future up until 2050 and 2030 were the numbers that he was giving. And he was talking, and I'm pretty sure he was talking about his GMO crops that they put all over Africa and South America. But anyway, he was talking about how that they would grow them. And then because of the changing areas in which they were going to not only be investing in because of this, but the way that the grow zone would react to the future. And he didn't really give too much details into that like he normally doesn't. But what he was talking about is rice, corn, and some of these others that he was calling climate sensitive crops. And he was talking about how they would be slowly moving them about, 20% at a time, like out of Africa, more into the Middle Eastern area, or, like from one crop to another nation, and that they would need to control this movement of crop zones to keep everything growing at the right pace. And if we didn't do that, then like places like Africa would see a 20% food reduction by 2030 and like a 70% food reduction or whatever the numbers were. Don't hold me down on the numbers. But basically the gist of the idea is that they were going to now start taking control of where the food grows in which grow zone, depending on their opinion of how the climate's going and their predictions of how their climate sensitive, probably GMO seeds, if I am guessing right, are going to start growing less and less crops over time into 2020 or 2050 and 2030 were the dates that he kept talking about. But back to the invasion idea, when we flew into Iraq and you were talking about, Gaddafi, right now something similar is happening with the Brinks. They're talking about basing their money system on tangible goods, oil, gold, water, weapons. Basically what the United States has done for a very long time, which is what they call the God business. That's gold, oil, and all of that stuff. Now, when we invaded Iraq, we did the same thing that we did to Gaddafi, and Iraq was also doing something similar. He decided to take control of his society, yada, yada, yada. He kind of was known as an iron fist, but what we didn't represent invading a country to take out a dictator with weapons of mass destruction. You think we'd fly in, we'd hit all the military targets, and we'd chase them down, which we did at a later date. But when we first went in there, our priorities were the Baghdad Museum of Natural History. We secured that area. We didn't secure the oil fields, like, common sense. We let them light them on fire and burn and, go into the atmosphere. But the other things that we did had nothing to do with taking out a dictator. The very first things that actually Clinton did back in the Clinton era was start bombing date plants, baby food factories, water filtration plants. And that's the MO of an invading force or trying to collapse or cripple a nation. Now, if you look at what's going on with the countries right now, some of the similar things are happening. It's just more of a high-tech version of it. Instead, they're attacking the supply chain. And we have depleted soil for the goods that are being grown, right? So the idea in the Iraq war was if we could get them malnourished for a long enough bombing campaign, when we finally did roll in 2003, it would be a weak, diminished, demoralized force of people fighting back. And that's a military strategy to do to any area that you're planning on invading. So let's reflect that to the United States. We have, I don't know how many cities now that their water system is just at the limit or the age in which it's falling apart. And they're having, water issues for those people in cities. And I imagine you're going to see more of that as money is swindled out of the country and not used to fix our infrastructure. And then you have the high-tech versions of, demoralizing and making people now malnourished by depleted, soil, GMO low nutrition foods in the stores, and then on top of that, low availability for the products that are available. So you go scamming through the headlines with this in mind, and I see all of these, articles like here's one: would we immediately go to war if we met ET? Because they bombard you with several topics simultaneously. I've noticed this pattern for the last 2 years. All of it is about Armageddon, starving, pandemic, or aliens. It's like they have nothing else in their playbook to give us. It's all the same thing repeated in cycles. I think it's because they have a really limited imagination. And keep in mind, these are the people that imagine that they're just going to join with tech and extend their lifespan out, and they'll have a feudalist system where, a small number of humans serve them day and night, kind of like it was in the ancient world, but more of a high-tech form, where they have your blood type and, they punish you. I recently saw a funny video that's going viral right now, where basically a guy was playing video games and the government conditioning service interrupted his video game playing and told him that, that playing 6 hours a day of video games is not productive for a civilian, and that you need to get out and do something productive, work or go here, volunteer or whatever. And if you don't, we'll reduce your social credit score by 3 points. So the guy voluntarily says no. Says, no, I would like to continue playing video games. And then it interrupts him again. It's like, are you sure? We will punish you further because we gave you the message. And that's where we're going. We're going into such a micromanaged state that you're not even allowed to have opinions outside of what the narratives of each government little bubble of tyranny is telling you. And then when you reach out and look around the world, you find out they're all giving the same message to all of the people around the world, including Russia. Like if you go just look at the Russian headlines and say, hey, what's conveniently available for prosecution, if you know what I mean. So this seems like a plan that's been worked for a very long time. And in this near future, the government will have the option of calling its own citizens insurgents because an insurgency happened, or, and it's all about these terms that they're using now. They're relabeling everything so that you have no avenue of argument. And that way they tied up free speech where you can't even legally defend yourself. And not to bring up something that just is like the icing on the cake. Now, I don't know how you feel about Alex Jones or not, but I've been watching him for a really long time. Before he even had the InfoWars thing, I knew who that bunch was. And they were making videotapes. People would copy the VHS tapes, like he made a couple movies. But throughout the years, if you go point by point on his predictions, he's at like a 98% accuracy rate, and they are destroying him. They gave him such a big settlement, and it's a joke. It's also a fake narrative. There's no way that either his company or him will ever be able to dish out $500 million. And their state laws and all of these other things that cap those settlements, yet they're projecting the idea to the public that if you say something against you can be sued by government and civilians that don't like what you said. So who cares about the criminal court and the constitutional system with its constitutional checks, balances, and protections? We'll just take you to civil court where the judge makes all of the rules. Now tell me, how is that any different than going to talk to the party to decide your fate if they've accused you of some kind of crime, and our counterpart, the CCCP? I don't see a difference.
You know, when you were speaking there prior to the break, you brought up the word infidel. So the play on words, the infidel. So what's the first thing that pops to your mind? There's 3 different definitions that are of the infidel. This comes from the Merriam-Webster's dictionary established in 1828. Number 1, a person who's not a Christian or opposes Christianity. Number 2, an unbeliever with respect to a particular religion. Oh, and number 3, one who acknowledges no religious belief. Or number 4, a disbeliever in something specified or understood. So if you believe that consciousness and the fabric that holds all space in the dimension together, that there's a consciousness behind that operates in mathematics, and actually vibratory consciousness of just light, that's it. It is the base layer. That the creator of that amount is something that is what you believe you'll be welcomed back into. That's what that number 4 is about, versus any kind of name that's given to it. So these words they are throwing around and try to change it, and there's always that one special word that you hear it and immediately you know it's associated with something. Because if I could throw a strange thought to you here. Now, perhaps I've talked about this once before. I know I did a series of videos on the ability and the size and the amount of crops that could be grown in North Africa and the Sahel if the above ground water continues to flow off the West African monsoon. Now, see, there could be, I'm just saying there could be a causation, and the reason that it was a low named storm Atlantic hurricane season is because that moisture and those pressure systems that would normally drive that from West Africa way into the low tropics, way over into like Turks and Caicos, like way down in the Caribbean. All that moisture and all that air flow is getting directed inland now. And this is what's causing the record rainfall and the record crop production across places like Tunisia and Egypt, Algeria. Even Morocco has some amazing crop yields. So, you have this continent that could grow the most food on the planet. 45 degrees north and above is going to continue to yield less and less and less. And as we get to that 40 degree or even 35 degrees north or south latitudes up to both poles, crop production is going to be greatly reduced. Because of that, it's going to cause shortages in every single nation that produces food. But even worse for those that rely on food imports because they can't grow enough food. Grow it somewhere else. Whoever controls and sets up this crop growing zone in the Sahel and North Africa would need cryptocurrency of sorts of a stable coin that could be anywhere accepted in its own block of nations, anywhere in Africa, that 1 equals 1. So if I get one of these for working in the North Sahel new crop grow zone project, I can spend it anywhere in Africa and abroad, because there'd be no exchange rate manipulation. You have the same, there's a world rate for it. They're paying me one of these. Now, set that aside. The pace of it going in to set this up is going to be the money flow in there. But then you have to think about the training of people that live there or don't now. Because all this immigration that was pushing and allowing a lot of people from Africa to go up into Europe, mainly hey, the guys that would put up a resistance to those coming in to set up the new crop growing zone, yeah, you don't have to share. The fighters are up north. They're not coming back. Free boat rides. That money that's going to be needed to turn that place from what it is now, and we're talking 13.8 million square kilometers, which is about 9 million square miles. You have to put all the water pumps in there, all the irrigation lines. You're going to have to put all the roads in there. You're going to have to try to electrify it somehow. You're going to have to provide all the training. You're going to need to provide all the housing for all the training and all the supply of keeping those people fed and entertained while they work. Then you're going to need to bring the crops in. And that whole thing that we see, you go to the Midwest of the U.S. and you see that grow zone there, like those massive amounts of grain storage warehouses, huge, gigantic machinery that I just don't see here that in East Tennessee. Like that kind of monster stuff is not really generally in East Tennessee. It's more, mid, small farms out here. People got tractors, but it's not like those kind of, sheesh, they're on 100,000 acres, those kind of tractors. How do you set all that up? Plus, you're going to have all the repair, the parts, all these things. But if you could, and all that infrastructure and the shutdowns, and with these shutdowns are coming price controls. If anybody hasn't noticed lately, everywhere is talking about price controls and also stopping any kind of derivatives trading on these things, electricity, coal, gas, food, corn. They're trying to stop that trade too because they know it's going to be lost. You need the training. You need a functioning monetary system to be able to. Any kind of wire cutters can cut it off and it's 1 gram of gold, physical. That's the way the necklaces and the bracelets are weighed out. They're exact. So you might buy a 1 ounce necklace, but it'll break down into as many pieces as you want it to. Where a kilo of that across the border, you're going to have a gold-backed stable coin for it to work. Because if you're going to go to a gold-backed new system in conjunction with carbon credit trading and all those other things we've heard of, you're going to digitize fisheries. How much is that fish is worth in the ocean? Okay, good. Write it on a number. We'll issue a bond against it once we also tally that forest and those mining rights and that river and the water over there. They're going to keep that as a value, but they're going to lock off the ecosystem so it has a permanent value, at least for 20 years. Nobody can go in there and fish like they do now. Once you pledge a forest, and they know exactly the minimum is usually 200 acres. Once you pledge that, you can't go into that 200 acres for 25 years. Because the minute you cut one tree, that survey that they did to show how many trees were growing and how much CO2 was sequestered suddenly becomes null and void because the information absolutely changed. That's on the human side. But what happens if there's a big windstorm come through? Obviously they could, but it's not going to be like, somebody cut a tree. Oh no, they cut half the trees. Oh, everything has to be revalued. So you see some of those maps with the red and yellow on them where they say there'll be zones where you can and cannot go, and there'll be very limited agriculture and limited habitation, etc. And then there's all that red there where it's nobody can go there. That's all that pledged forests for a certain dollar value to restart a new currency in conjunction with the precious metals, in conjunction with the real estate, all the digitized fisheries and natural wildlife, minerals, forest, earth included, digitized as a value. And the carbon credit that's coming off those forests. So how much CO2 sequestered, that suddenly becomes like dollar value, which could be flipped over into, could I say, gold-backed stable coin and transferred anywhere on the planet, just like you do with gold bullion jewelry today. It's a daunting task to look at in the wider sense, but perhaps this is the cycle where they just switch places on the planet every time this comes around, this cycle here. Because there's a gentleman I know, David Stig Hansen, who's traveling to the Rakat structure as we speak. Sent me a message about a week ago, said he was in Mauritania. And he'd gone to the Rakat structure once prior to this. This is his second trip out there. So after he came back, I got to get him on the show. So David, if you're listening tonight, if you happen to be over in Africa listening to this as you're transiting out on your ham radio or some kind of comms listening to us sat style, that flow over there, that part of the world was once underwater, and it seems like it just emerged out, and all that draining water created that desert. It scraped everything with it out into the ocean. And if you look at other places on the planet too, like if you look over around Iran, going up past Georgia, it looks like it scraped all through there too, especially if you draw a line from, let's say, the Red Sea and take it all the way to Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan, way on the Chinese border, you're going to see what looks like a huge scrape mark there too, like the water came over the same direction. So is it part of the cycle that's known on magnetic field flips, on magnetic field anomalies, on partial reversals, on magnetic wandering? Like how far does it really have to go before something significant terrestrially happens? And that's the reason for all these things that we're talking about tonight, is to distract you from that natural, cycle. Hamaker. Dr. Hamaker. I'm going to throw one last thing here. Spoke about the remineralization of the soil, because Ransom, you'd mentioned as the soils blow away, you're eating foods grown on depleted mineral soils. And Dr. Hamaker was well known for the research talking about remineralizing soils will increase massively the output of your food, because that soil is so mineral less. And the minute you add something back into it, that's the minerals that got scraped out, whoosh, those plants just do amazingly well. Super strong, a larger yield, is super big. Granite dust is what it is. Granite dust, that's the secret to all farming now. So they're doing these experimental things where they'll, take 2 acres and they'll mix in several tons of the granite dust and then do a test plot. They'll just plant like you would plant, and then they'll do the traditional next to it, and then you see things that are just so easily heads above, so easy. Like, what? Those yields are 25 or 30% bigger. Those plants are that much larger. That's impossible just from putting rock dust in the soil. And then learning about biochar and leaf compost, and trying to do that JDAM method to create microbes to drop into the soil to get them to spread out into that web of life, just using rice and sugar and letting things ferment. These are the types of things that I bet would be implemented. Those kind of gigantic jumps. So the next green revolution is not going to come from chemical. It's not going to be any kind of GM seeds. It's going to be remineralizing the soil of where your grow zone is, because you can instantly gigantically increase the yield just by adding granite dust into your earth as you're tilling it in if you do till farming. So the world's resources being redirected down into Africa. Think about it. Price caps. You're sending everything wherever you need it to be. So I don't know, Ransom, how do you think that pans out as a, do you think that has any validity? If you could take the world's supply chain under the guise of price caps, economic collapse, war, or whatever, and all, like you say, and we've noticed too, every country is working in unison. What if they all decided in unison to send all those price capped items and then set up that new grow zone down in North Africa? I don't know. How far along the line do you think we are into that? The new grow zone's got to be set up immediately. And Chinese did a huge amount of investment in infrastructure build out. They even built ports in Tanzania, upgraded a huge amount of rail infrastructure, road infrastructure, electrical infrastructure, communications equipment, huge amounts, both coasts. So if you're going in there, and if you look at NASA World Earth Observer, you can see changes also in the plant vegetation index if you use that one. There's more green now across the deserts there as you go through the yearly months. It's possible. I see a culmination of natural cycle and man-made colliding right here through history, and then remineralizing soil to trick us to say that it's too many dots to connect, man. Maybe I'm just reaching for points. I don't know. Maybe it's just too far-fetched. Maybe I'm trying to grab the eye on the top of infidel. I don't know.
Well, I do know there's this. You gave it two options. I think it's just that they pick when there's a natural cycle to begin their artificial man-made cycles. And here's a cycle for everybody. This is a great article from Unheard that talks about the future of food. And that's what we're always talking about. How's the food going to get to where you're at? Is it going to be nutritious? Is it going to be healthy? Well, let me tell you what the world governments and the conglomerates have planned for you. And it might surprise you. Big veganism is coming for you. That's the title of this article. And then below it, it says the meat industry, bankrolling the movement. And what it talks about is that all of these companies, and here we'll get into it, where they're talking about all of them have the same plan. And this includes the meat companies like Tyson and some other ones. What they are all putting their money into is plant-based fake food made out of insects and other things. So fake meat, fake, everything. So here's part of this article. The sustainable protein system is a promotion of alt proteins that is opposed to conventional proteins we might get from food, blah, 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 blah. But anyway, it gets down to the bottom where it talks about the big, all the bucks are flowing in only one way, and that's into plant-based alternatives to meat. And some of the companies, of course, are going down what we joke about. Food Valley is directed towards consuming insects, algae, fungi, microbacteria, all of this stuff. And you're thinking, oh, that's gross, blah, blah, blah. Why would we do that? I'm just going to go down and get my steak and I'm going to go get my this or that. But then when you look at the companies that are bankrolling this transition from real food to fake food, because that's what I'm calling it, is fake food. And some of the programs to try to get you to that are these vegan ideas that they're trying to tell you that you could just eat vegan and you'll be fine without animal proteins. But don't worry about that. We have another product we're also going to put out. It's made by bugs. Don't worry about it. It's got a little algae. Eat your protein bar. That's basically where they're going with this. But right here, it says more than 60 agri-food multinationals have invested in the Food Valley and centered their research operations there. They include Kraft, Heinz, Nestle, Cargill, Kikkoman, DuPont. Of course, you got to have DuPont in there. A field of giant plant-based groups, Flora and Greek vegan cheese, and they list all of this stuff and talking about the 50 billion, 85 million money that they're just dumping in it. And basically what this shows you is that even the companies that would hurt themselves by this movement don't care. They're going into it anyway. They're putting their money into these fake products that will be the only option for you at any of these food outlets that you can think of. And that's what they're saying, is that they are going to replace any nutritional food. And we're talking about regular plants and vegetables that you would be getting that are already grown in depleted soil. Now, imagine these depleted soil bubbles of farmland owned by corporates, and all of it's depleted, and then they just mush it all together, grind it, and make products out of it. And that's for your vegetarian needs. And then for your animal needs are ground up, bugs and fungus and stuff like that. So where they're going is someplace very dark. They're already transitioning their company, their resources, their money over to this weird future of where people just don't eat real food. And if you get into this article, it says that they're going to solve world hunger. They're going to solve climate change. They're going to solve government disputes over grain. It's a pretty trippy article, and it talks about that. But think about that idea, because I think that is the reality, and all of these supply chain issues and reduction in the food output is all steps to go to this transition where the people that control the food output are about to start putting out a new product, and none of it is going to be actual food. It's going to be food-like stuff, which is basically what we have in the grocery store now. It's just that you can still navigate it, find some organic products, find some meat, find some fresh vegetables, even though that stuff is still tainted. And I want to, I don't know how to word it, but recently we went through a phase, I guess you could call it, in the last 2 years. Everybody knows what I'm talking about. It's the big pandemic. Well, a lot of things changed there. Definitions of science, definitions of what medicines do. We'll leave it at that. Well, there was some medical practice that a big portion of the world took part in. And for the other group of people that were trying not to take part in that, guess what? You're part of the experiment too, because now they're giving those same things that produce a spike in your protein supplement, if you get what I'm saying. They're putting that right into the cattle. And a number of the cattle are just dying outright. But don't worry, the ones that live will be producing you milk, cheese, and meat with a certain special ingredient in it. And then you, if you want, I can't really say it on air, but Google Bill Gates and mRNA lettuce. So it's on all aspects of your food pyramid: the grain, the fresh foods, the meat. We are being programmed, and there's no way that you could deny that now. So if you don't know,
can I stop you? Can I stop you right there?
Yeah.
In India, they had 57,000 cattle that died after that. So these are the kind of big stories that we're making over in India. Like 57,000. Okay. How's that going to work?
Yeah, I don't know. And now you always have to question why big groups of cattle are dying. What happened the day before? I'm not going to say what it is, but maybe the commercial ranchers decided to use a product or something like that. I'm not saying that because we don't want to get held down and Alex Jones or anything. But I do know that there are certain products that are made by certain industries that are putting extra special ingredients in your meat and your cheese and your milk. So that Amish farmer, that rancher that you know, and your garden are the future if you want to continue being a Homo sapiens sapien, because let me tell you, they're making new kinds of people out there. And those people are chimeras of God knows what. And, you know, I was hearing this guy rant the other day about, interdimensional beings and how all the religions talk about them. And, you know, we've got on this topic too, talking kind of about where is the transhuman future really taking people? Is it that there's some kind of entity that needs human beings to cross some kind of threshold they couldn't normally cross? Maybe, just being in our physical realm, or, in my opinion, I think that this all has to do with what happens when you die, which is a DMT trip It's a certain molecule that initiates a process in your brain. When every person, every human being dies, they go through that process. And I think what all of this is about is hijacking that process, either for one, some kind of entity to get into this physical form so that they could go through that threshold that they never could have got through their dimension, or they just want to control what happens to you in your cycle that happens at the end. And I've been thinking about that for a long time, because the fact is that all around the world too, you have these new conditions and rules on what happens to human beings when they die. Like, are you going to be incinerated, or are you going to be filled with embalming fluid that happens to be a hardcore hallucinogen? People smoke that on the streets. They call it sherm because they go crazy and they go into this big hallucinogenic state. That's the same thing that they pump into your body shortly after you die. And if you've looked into the studies of death, the brain keeps going for weeks. It keeps doing things for days. Complex processes are happening. And the way that we have it now, you either get burned within a few days, or you get pumped full of hallucinogen that might counteract the natural process of the hallucinogen that your brain releases at death, which is DMT. So you want to get really far out there. Think about the hijacking, literally, of the human soul, if there is such a thing. That seems to be the goal of this transition. This reset is to take control of that free spirit, that free soul, your decision making, your free will. And that's what they're talking about. We're at a time where they can just program you. And I had my browser crashed, but there were some headlines about, no need for men or women anymore. We can just grow people in bags, just like they've been practicing for 20 years on livestock. And the fact that they can just mix and match genes. And they were showing these rats that have human brain genes and, monkeys that have human genes. Well, guess what? They can do that same process backwards and make a chimera that has less than a few % of something else. And if that something came out of a lab or it came out of another animal, you are no longer a Homo sapiens sapien, and neither will your children be if you have any.
Yeah, I had a point to say there. I lost it, getting that deep. Where does the world go from here? Those cattle being lost, even what you talk about traditional agriculture, like the regular farming practices that go on, either running your herds across wild pasture or grain feeding over the last, month or so, or if it's purely feedlot or whatnot. If they could turn that into deliver that same material through the stomach form, how is that possible? Unless it's nano-transferred, then it would be possible. And that would explain 5G too, because you need that fully encompassing net from top to bottom, left to right, as tall as the towers are. Like if you go around a few cities, you can see the grid of how tightly packed it is, really. So right now, what you're seeing in the countryside or whatever, when you're driving, let's say you're driving around a city. Okay, you see the towers in the city to be able to get the mobile phone communications. You see those pretty closely spaced now, way more than you did back when you'd see one giant tower on a hill. And that was the mobile communications. Then you see one, maybe you don't even see the next one. It's so far away over the next horizon of a mountain range. You see one. Now, literally, you go in a city, you see 5 at a time, 10 at a time. That's insane how tightly packed it. But the whole thing about it, it's creating a vibratory space in our third dimension right there using frequency and hertz, electricity, creating a magnetic field, excuse me. So what could hold state in that magnetic field generated by that higher current or that higher vibration? The higher the gigahertz jammed in there is, the faster it moves. And remember, magnetism and electricity are related. They need each other. You can't have one without the other. They still don't understand. It's kind of like alchemy still in today's world. Yeah, it's the electricity, but it needs the magnetic field to move anywhere. But without the magnetic field, it won't generate without the electricity. So, like, which is first? You bring it back to that whole endless consciousness of what you would consider God's state of vibration at the base layer to let everything else begin. Rules, whether they be quantum rules or whether they be into the atomic range.
That's why you have kids that need a litter box in the corner, because the magnetic field makes them think that they're a cat. It all makes sense now, David. You just put it in a certain way. Like, think about it. You look around at all of these people acting crazy. They're hacking people up. They think they're animals. They can't figure out what they are. You have the baby generation that is way delayed on communication skills and developmental skills. And then the group above them can't figure out what species they are, what gender they are, or what reality is. And you're talking about that right there, the magnetic field affecting how people think. You think that might be a symptom there, is where, kids think that they're animals? And I mean, think about that. If you got to put a litter box in the corner of the room for a kid that thinks he's an animal, we're at a whole another level of thinking, and it just goes right into what you were saying there, man.
I'm going to pull you back to the 1991 invasion of Iraq, the Kuwait invasion. Iraq going into Kuwait, not America going to Iraq. The delay between it, you're seeing it happen, but it happened way slower. It took weeks and weeks and months and months. Right now, everything seems like it's speeding much faster. Like the news, you got to think about it, looking back at those kind of news stories where, yeah, Kuwait rolled over with all these tanks and things, and ooh, what happened? Oh, Kuwait was invaded. Wait, how did they take all their tanks and things? And then it'd be like a week later. Well, now with all social media and everything, it goes like minutes, hours later. It's really extremely much faster. But that whole key term of weapons of mass destruction, I always remember that was the universal term used, plus, right when it came out. You got to think this was back in the 1990s, like 30 years ago. So there were an enormous amount of people that were still, not even very old, into maybe to the 60s, that grew up to the cowboy Indian 1950s, Western shows. And there was one always famous saying, smoke them out. Well, I don't know if you'd use the same verbiage today, because most of those people have passed on, because they'd be 100 by now. Add 30 years, if you're 60, all of them at least be in their 90s minimum. But that was a very well-known phrase, smoke them out, from all the battles going out west and forts burned and all these things. Or chasing somebody and they're in the canyons, you got to smoke them out. Would you use the same verbiage as today, because it's a different generation? So what are they using today to get you the same thing? Like if they're going to flush somebody out of a location, what's the words they're going to use? If they're going to use it for the provocation to go in, it won't be weapons of mass destruction. It'll be something different. So all you have to do is really just replace the noun, replace the object. You can probably write sentences on your wall. Okay, replace the reason, replace the country. You can just play this game all day long. But back in 1991, when they were saying this, and just before they went in, news was moving slower. But then after what Ransom talked about, where they went for the Baghdad Museum and pillaged that thing to the ground, how many artifacts were stolen out of there by those that were supposedly on watch or had set up a perimeter around there already? Things were being helicoptered out of there, taken by giant trucks, straight out of like an Indiana Jones movie. Straight up out of that. I'm thinking like 1950s cargo carrying, throw the tarp down and just drive it out. Super gigantic, 6,000 horsepower engine pulling that thing down the road. Everything gone. But the visions they gave us for the reasons to go in. Remember those birds that were in oil, all the oil wells were on fire. You got these landscapes that are almost unbelievable because every oil well's on fire, either with pressure, which is a strange, they have a lot of oil in the Middle East, always pressurized caps there. Whoa, it's the stuff shooting out flamethrower style. Dark black smoke everywhere as far as you can see in different ways and shapes and forms of all these fires in the different wells. Some of them were only gas, so you saw this giant blowtorch coming out. Others still had a lot of liquid in it, and it was creating sort of a fountain effect. And they showed you every type and kind of an oil well that could be burning, smoke coming off, pressures, and different kind of sparkly candles coming out of it. And then the birds, because all that was uncapped and it was flowing just like today, which is strange. The same exact, I'm telling you, it's exact. The Nord Stream 1 and 2 get blown up. What are they telling you? It's unbelievable, flowing uncontrolled into the oceans and then evaporating. Uncontrolled. Well, you go back to 91, after the U.S. went in and torched all those wells, and whatever happened is forces retreated. Same thing. Oh, it's an uncontrolled, the things are all blown up. Oh, the wells are leaking. All the burning ones are dripping. Look, oh, it's uncontrolled. Oh, it's creating lakes of oil in the depressions in the desert, where all these birds were flailing in the desert in these little huge pockets of oil that you'd mostly see on an offshore Exxon Valdez accident with all the birds on shore and washing in the water. This time, they were just stuck in the desert in lakes of oil in the sand. That was what we were shown, right? But it's the same exact thing they're trying to portray right now. Unchecked, can't cap it, massive disaster. But how many times have we seen this run? I'm sure there's somebody going to come out and go, oh, they're taking the incubator, they're taking the babies out of the incubators. That could be a bold call. If that was the same excuse, I would absolutely be flabbergasted that anybody would believe that was real, because they did the same exact thing. So two unchecked things, I mean, check the box. Okay, now what's the next narrative, the runoff of that, though? That's the question. I don't know. I'm just taking notes because I'm on Mike Adams' program tomorrow. So I'm trying to build up a pretty good way to deliver the full message of what we're talking about tonight in 30 minutes. Like, how would you summarize that?
I would think the insanity, right? We cut down forests for the green movement. We put up a bunch of fans to cut down the birds to save the environment. I mean, it's all backwards. Everything is backwards. It's an insane world.
Hey, was that the person who identifies as a cat? Thanks for joining us, David DuByne here with Ransom Godwin. See you next week. Thank you for your time. Bye.
Thank you for listening to Revolution